So I learned about Rachael recently from an article that was in the CBC about her Nothing New Year, where she talked about not buying anything new for a whole year. It turns out I'd also seen her in a portrait done by The Guardian back in March. I really admire her for her openness and vulnerability to sharing everything she bought in a whole year, all her personal belongings. She's lived and studied in North Carolina. Now she lives and works here in Montreal for an interior design firm. She's put on exhibits in art galleries. She's designed for kombucha brands and Le Grand Ballet. In addition to her work on sustainability, she's involved with organizing a discussion group in collaboration with the West Island Black Community Association of Montreal. So I really admire how she takes action in her own life without any sort of outside agenda. She's also a very talented graphic designer. Please welcome Rachael.
That was so nice. Thank you for having me.
So yeah, I guess I mentioned it a bit. I think you call it Nothing New Year. Like, how did that come about? The idea of not buying anything new over a whole year. And so yeah, how did you decide to start that? And what were maybe some of like the challenges?
So I started, I think it was really near the end of 2019, right before 2020. It had been about 3 years since I gave away the grand majority of all of the stuff that I had in my life, because I had first found out about minimalism from talking to a friend at a coffee shop at my university, just saying how amazing it would be to just kind of have like a uniform, like a daily uniform. So you don't have all of these clothes and have to, decision fatigue. I was learning about all of this stuff just because I think it was getting kind of talked about. And someone at the coffee shop just said, I'm sorry for like over listening to your conversation, but you should read this book about minimalism and the minimalists. And so I ended up reading the book and just doing my own research into minimalism, and ended up giving away 90% of my belongings, and did another project with that, which I'm hopefully launching in 2021, a book of all of the objects that were really hard to give away. Like, the teddy bear that your grandma gives you when you like made together. It's like, it's hard to just give that to Renaissance, or like, it's not going to mean the same thing to someone, you feel like, because it's so emotional. Anyway, so I'm doing a book of those objects. It had been about 3 years since I did that. And it's such a fulfilling feeling, and like this addictive feeling of like, I could be more focused. Like I could get this clutter out of my life. Like I could, because inevitably like you get more clutter. And I was looking for a way to kind of push minimalism further for myself, because even if I wasn't buying a lot of stuff, like in terms of clothing or gifts or anything like that, I was still buying the stuff that I need on a daily basis, like toothpaste and condoms and deodorant. And I was looking at the brands that I was buying them from and realizing how connected those brands were to things that I was trying to fight in the world, and realizing like I'm still supporting these people. Like I'm still giving my money to them, regardless of if it's just a tube of toothpaste that costs $1.75. I'm giving them $1.75 when there's so much that's wasted. And so I decided to see if it was even possible to buy nothing for a year, was the real question. Because I've never done anything like this before. And I didn't know if it was even possible to kind of step outside of consumerism to get more creative with the way that I bring things into my life. I think it was slowly an idea that has just evolved, and I decided to just jump in and finally do it for 2020 and purchase nothing new.
And then obviously the pandemic happened. Like, was that a challenge for you, or what was some of the hardest things to actually keep up?
Well, the pandemic was, obviously a pretty big unexpected thing that I never thought would happen, especially during this year. I never foresaw that being an issue. My main way of getting pre-owned or used items was going to Renaissance or going to thrift stores. That's how I got my stuff. So I had to completely kind of rethink the way that I got these items. And I ended up getting the majority of everything. Over 70% was from Buns, which is an app that is where you just trade objects. You never exchange money. People put objects on their profile that are kind of cluttering up their home, that still have so much life in them, but that they no longer need, or they have an extra, or, the shampoo didn't work for them on their hair. But it's a full bottle, so they don't want it to go to waste. And Buns is where I found pretty much all of the like day-to-day stuff that I never thought you could trade for. Like I never, ever, ever, ever in my life thought that I would find condoms, first of all. But then second of all, there were so many little things that you would never see on Facebook Marketplace, that was my main secondary source of getting things used, was searching for it on Facebook marketplace if I needed something specific. When I realized I was going to need things like bug spray, it was like, where am I going to get bug spray? Oh, Buns. Like Buns has everything. Like there's somebody who has too much of everything. And if you have patience and effort, like put the effort in to kind of organize it, because organizing can be a challenge, like communicating with people, can take a lot of time, but instead of scrolling on social media, I was scrolling on Buns and taking all those extra moments to organize those meetups. So that was easier. But when you said the most difficult thing, it was never that difficult. Like I never, until the very end, thought like, oh, I could just buy this and no one would know and no one would care. Because I think I'm a little too stubborn for that. Like I decided I was going to do this. And so there was no choice but to do it. But near the end, I had been waiting 11 months. I had posted in January. I'd been looking since January for stamps, for postage stamps to mail, because I mail letters pretty often for like Valentine's Day and Christmas. And I have a lot of friends and family back home, which takes more stamps because you have to do 2 stamps to send back to the US. I could not find more than like 5 stamps at a time. December 1st hit and I had spent days making these Christmas cards by hand and like writing all the letters. And I was like, you know what? Who's really going to say, oh, but you bought postage stamps new? You know, like who's really going to care? Or, you know, maybe I could just send them January 1st and the mail's so messed up anyways because of COVID. Like I could just say it, you know, took longer to get there. If you're determined enough and lucky enough, I just got really lucky and found someone who had bought the wrong stamps for their company. So he had a roll of 50 specifically US stamps. So it was the exact amount to send to the US because actually 2 stamps is too much, but it was $1.30 stamps. So that was definitely one of the hardest things to purchase. But the project was never that hard. It was just a balance of just more patience and more effort. It was never like desperation. And I think that's one of the really important things to remember about this is like, I had the choice to do this project. And so many people don't have the choice to have patience when they need new shoes. They need new shoes because they have to go to work and they don't have another option and they can't afford to buy them new and they have to buy them used, or they are not in the position to be able to go without. Like they need an item to survive. They're not able to wait 11 months to get something. Whereas I got to choose to do that. Whereas so many people are not in that position.
And thinking about how some of these things, the stamps, it took like 11 months or, you know, even just getting your toothpaste, you got to be searching and trying to find the right person. Like, do you think that gave you like a new appreciation for when you actually got the object, right? It's like, I kind of worked for this and like I spent time finding it, and it's like kind of an experience of going through buying it instead of just nowadays, especially with the pandemic, it's just like you can just click online, like, oh, it's going to come show up. And it's like you're so detached from it. And at least this way you get some other level of like attachment to it.
There's a sense of like accomplishment and success with any thrift store find. For example, I don't know if you've ever gone thrift store shopping and like you find a shirt that's not only like a color that you like, it like fits you and it's still in good condition and you feel like you've cheated the system almost. It's like, I needed this and I can get it used and not give money to corporations that I don't believe in, and also save these materials from being wasted. You know, like it's this ultimate feeling of like cheating the system, which I think is like the system, which makes it so hard to find a company that is manufacturing ethically, sustainably sourced, vegan, not greenwashing, and not secretly owned by like Procter and Gamble is so much work. Like as anyone who has gone into trying to find even just sustainable clothing, it's so difficult and it's so expensive. It can be so expensive. And, you know, even when you find something, it's still new material that's being produced. Like the more that I learn, and I still have so much to learn, but the more that I learn, the harder it is to find a company that fits what I want to be supporting. So the solution is just getting everything used, and to be able to get everything that I need used, the appreciation for those objects is huge because I don't know, there's a lot of social awkwardness around reusing, which I find to be really a hindrance.
kind of brings me to this idea too of consumerism and how like it's very much built into our culture and society. That's kind of a big part of how you fit into society and like have your place is like by being a consumer almost. When you buy something, you're buying like the idea behind it too. If you just look at any advertising or any marketing, it's like they're selling you kind of this idea. And how did you approach this project, the consumerism side? Can anyone just do this?
It's kind of always being intentional. I think that was a big part of this project, is just being intentional, and minimalism. It's being intentional about like what you actually need. And on Buns, you have a list of things that you're looking for so that people who are interested in your items can look at your list, and maybe they have something like extra aluminum foil that they wouldn't have posted on Buns, but they can trade for you. And so just having a list of things that you're looking for is helpful. So it's not just this, or it was for me. So it's not just this like always looking for things. You have your things that you're looking for and that's it. It's not just about random consuming because you want that high of like, I don't know. I absolutely am not immune to the high of getting a new object. And I think that has been multiplied. The joy that you get when like you're looking for a book specifically for a gift for somebody, and it's a specific book. No one's putting it on Buns, and like it's not on Facebook Marketplace. Like it's been a while. I couldn't go to the bookstores because it was closed because of COVID, the used bookstores. And so I could only get it on Facebook Marketplace or Buns. Took 6 months, but I knew what I was going to get my friend for their birthday. And finally, somebody posted the Dune book. I mean, it made my whole day because I was like, okay, well, I'll trade you. Oh, I have this on your list. I could trade you this. And, you go meet up with them and then you get this book for free. There's something cluttering my house less. I know it's going to go to good use because unfortunately, a lot of the time you give stuff to Renaissance, I need to learn more about it. But I've learned a lot of the time they have to throw it away or it goes somewhere else because it's not usable or it's not going to sell in the stores. And so you don't know if it's really going to go to use. And when you trade an item with somebody, they actually want it because they met up with you. And to be able to give that book to my friend was like, it was so much more fun and fulfilling than it would have been if I just went to the store and got it. And I definitely could ride that high of like getting a new item. Like, for example, I was always looking for skincare because who's not, I don't know, that's a personal thing that I really enjoy having is some nice skincare. It wasn't all just things that I, need to survive. It was stuff that's fun for me as well. And I can ride that high for a few days. And I think that's one of the flaws with this project for me personally is I wish this next year, like this year of 2021, I'm kind of wanting to step back from looking for those highs in objects because this was still very focused on what I was bringing into my life and like what I was getting. It was very much like, what am I going to be getting next? Like I wasn't scrolling on Instagram. I was scrolling on Buns, but I was still like consuming. I was looking for something that I can have. And I think that was an unfortunate thing that I realized over the year was like, I was too focused on what I was needing and what I was getting. That's something that I'm able to focus a little bit more on this year as I continue my Nothing New Year because it was so much fun that I'm just continuing it, but I'm opening it up to small businesses and local businesses that I want to support because, there's a lot of zero waste stores and there's one right down the street for me that I can get my toothpaste from there and let someone else reuse the toothpaste on Buns. So for your question of can everybody do this, anyone who's interested should take a week and try it. What do you think of like, oh, I need that? And what'll happen if you don't get that? And what, where are you going to buy it from? Who would you be giving that money to? And is there someone local or a small business you could give that money to, for a lot of basic necessities for those who are like financially able to do this? There are local companies and yeah, it's a little more expensive, but I think it's worth the challenge of just like kind of the self-reflection of your purchasing habits and just your time habits. Like, what do you do when you don't have anything to do? And it's like, why are we doing that? What could we be filling our time with that would feel better? In the end, it always felt empty.
Yeah, there are a few things there. Like I like that idea of intention, right? Like going with intention about what you're going to buy. And, you and your friend's book that for her birthday, like having that intention behind it and not just buying something on like a whim it brings me back to like what I was mentioning before of like, we're kind of conditioned to believe that like through consumption, through getting this like external object, it'll somehow fulfill you or like fill some part in you, feeding on that part of you that's kind of lacking. That's why I find it such an interesting like problem.
We're taught it as a coping mechanism that, because of marketing. I mean, listen, I work in marketing, like I'm a graphic designer. I'm doing these projects on the side because I do not want to be in the classic world of marketing, but I very much like have a 4-year degree in all of the ways that we can trick people into buying things or feeling like you need something, adding something to your life. That's exactly what that book that the woman in the coffee shop recommended to me. It's The Minimalists. The idea that really stuck with me was this thing that they talk about a lot about keeping objects that add value to your life. A lot of people with minimalism say, I don't want to get rid of my collection of books. Like, I love the way that it feels. I don't want to get one e-reader that maybe I would have less objects, but, I get real joy from lending the books to my friends and feeling them and smelling the, it's just a different experience. And no one's telling you to get rid of your books. Like, absolutely have the things that add value to your life. It's about getting rid of the stuff that doesn't add value to your life. And I think that was kind of this idea of minimalism and objects that add value is very much behind this whole project. I mean, like I said, that's, I think, the base of where I needed to come at it from, at least, was an understanding of, or at least a little bit of a better understanding of myself. And when I look for affirmation in certain objects, like thinking, like, for example, I still think if I have a really expensive ballpoint pen and I go to an interview and they see my refillable, eco-friendly ballpoint pen that, like, for some reason they'll think I'm a better graphic designer. It's like, why do I think that? Like, why am I, yes, I want a great pen, but why am I talking about what someone else is going to be thinking of me? Like, why do I not just want a ballpoint pen because I want to really enjoy the experience of writing? So it's kind of just being more intentional and being more mindful of what you're actually feeling and what you're true, like being honest with yourself of like, why do you want that pen?
Building on that idea of like personal action or personal change. And when I think about the idea of sustainability or like, these challenges facing our society kind of at large, and I could argue that for real larger impacts and stuff to actually change, we need those in power, governments, companies, and these bigger scales to make changes. At the same time, I'm kind of under the impression too that it's not just a one-way thing. Like, your personal life is almost kind of a reflection of society too. And like, how do you see the personal life having an impact versus like a company making a change?
One of the most disgusting things companies can do is tell us that we need to be doing something different instead of them changing, putting it on the consumer rather than the companies. It's a distraction from the fact that the company is not making a change. Before this project, I had purchased some jeans and I was looking at the tag and it said something like, wash these jeans less to save on your environmental impact. Like, what are you doing, Levi's, to save on your water impact? Or are you just making me think that you're an economic, like a green company because you're telling me to wash my jeans less? It's like, I promise you, there's something within your company that would be 1,000 times more effective for the environment than me as a consumer washing my jeans less. And yes, I fully agree. Like, you shouldn't wash your jeans that often. Like, it's, they're not made to be washed. It's not about that. It's about the distraction of like, you're a bad person and it's on the people to be doing something instead of on the companies to be making change. Because in the end, like, yes, consumers have power. And yes, we need 1 million people doing something imperfectly rather than 10 people doing it perfectly. But it's also skirts the people who are A, having the most impact on the environment, these companies, and B, who have the power to change that. It skirts them from having to really make any change. For me in this project, it was first and foremost, a personal project to think about what I'm getting and who I'm giving my money to. I mean, it's been a dream that anyone has been interested in it and has heard about it, because it's really encouraging to hear that so many people do notice these feelings in themselves of that emptiness, that you get from always consuming, or the quickness of being able to order something on Amazon and having it the next day. Like, that's been really encouraging, but it doesn't have an actual impact on the companies at all. Like, of course it doesn't. But one of the things that I did think about doing at the beginning of the project was, for every object that I didn't buy, for example, the Crest toothpaste, about writing Crest a letter and saying like why I didn't buy their toothpaste. And so I'm thinking of still like doing that this year. It's really up to the companies. That's why I want to get more involved in local policy and politics, because that really is where the changes are happening, is policy.
Yeah, so that brings up a lot of stuff for me too, of like having this struggle of wanting to try and kind of make changes, and short of like being, the CEO in charge of Crest or whatever, it's like I'm not able to affect that change. So I really struggle with this idea of like, how can I really make an impact or have a difference?
It's a mix of like education, like learning more about how do we actually make these changes, and who do we need to be contacting, and getting involved in politics it feels inaccessible a lot of the time. But also like I said before, like there's that saying of we need 1,000 people doing it imperfectly rather than 10 people doing it perfectly. I think doing what you're passionate about, even though it's not going to change everything immediately. Like, you don't know what it's going to change. You don't know who's going to get inspired by that. You don't know whose ears it's going to fall on, who may be involved in policy and may know those people and may be able to help with those next steps. I think it's really, really, really easy to feel helpless and to feel like we don't have a choice, like we don't have any power, but you have to keep going anyways. I think it's easy to feel like something you can do in your daily life isn't going to have the big impact that you hoped that it would, but it's also better than nothing. Do the stuff that you're excited about, like this was a project that excited me for whatever reason. I didn't necessarily go into it thinking like I'm going to do this because I want to be, inspiring others to be living their lives in a more intentional and sustainable way. I just did it because I was curious to see if it was possible, and I'm a designer and I wanted to make a website and do a bunch of illustrations. And I think a lot of the time the system it's meant to make us feel powerless. You have to follow that stuff that you're passionate about, regardless of how small you think it is. Like, I never thought, kind of with this project, like regardless of how small, each purchase of toothpaste is, it makes a difference. Regardless of like, I ended up at the end of the year, I had 151 items. That was 151 really small items that I normally would just buy when I go to the grocery store. But, that's a lot. It adds up to a lot. And I think each of us is passionate about our own thing. It would be a shame to not do that work, or to not make that art, or to not film that movie, or to not, write that song just because we are already judging it before we even make it.
You mentioned too, like, you are a graphic designer, and talked earlier about how like marketing and, influencing is a big part of a lot of that work. And how do you think, your work has been influenced by like the medium of social media?
Marketing has always been about getting you to buy something, or getting you to interact with something, or invest in something, or feel connected to something. And now that that's in our pockets, it's competing a lot more with a lot of other people that are trying to grab your attention. Get like 2 seconds of somebody's time is a successful like interaction, according to a lot of people. Because even a scroll a lot of the time is less than a second. It's even more difficult as a person, as like a human being. It's even more difficult because you're always 2 clicks away from being completely distracted from the reason you were online. And if we're looking for that distraction because we're bored or because we're, want to get that serotonin boost, we'll be looking out for those things. So design definitely has radically changed from when it's been print.
And you mentioned again, like the ease of just distracting or scrolling or getting lost in it. And
the teams in social media, like it's huge, as everybody knows, and so many people working to keep you on those platforms, like you have to be really intentional and really aware of your habits to get out of that. I kind of stopped using Instagram completely for personal use and just used it for my work. Actually, this past year, I unfollowed anything other than people that inspired me creatively, because I was doing the classic thing of, comparing my life to the lives of people that I was seeing online, and comparing my possessions to the possessions of people and doing all of that stuff. So I ended up, instead of saying like, oh, I'm going to quit Instagram, because I knew I would just go back at this stage of my life, that's where I am. So I decided I want it to be adding value to my life. And for it to add value, my favorite thing on Instagram was the creatives. So that's what I kept. But I think a lot of this project actually, like, I grew up, I'm from North Carolina, which is in the Bible Belt. So everything is Christian, has some kind of twinge of that. And I went to Catholic high school. And so I think I tend to be a really guilt-ridden person. And I think that's why it's really overwhelming. The more that you learn about sustainability and how we're ruining the environment and how every purchase, just all of this stuff. And like I mentioned earlier, like if I'm going to buy something new from a company, I don't want it to make me feel horrible. Like it has to be ethical, it has to be sustainable, it has to be vegan, it has to be telling the truth. And the amount of work that takes was just traded for the work that it takes to find something used. But I think also working in design and working in a marketing way at this moment in my career, since I have like a traditional graphic design job at the moment, there's a lot of guilt that goes along with like my day-to-day life. Like my 9 to 5 is like marketing. That's hard. And I think that also influenced why I chose to go so extreme with my personal life of not buying anything new, because of just this like crippling guilt of like, oh my God, what am I supporting?
Yeah, and having that like guilt or shame around doing anything. But before we end, I want to get to like this last subject that I touched on a bit like in the intro, which was this book club that you started or are part of. Maybe you can just give us an idea of what that is and how that started.
Everything that happened with George Floyd this summer, it was incredibly unfortunate that it took 26 years of my life for this to hit home for me, especially coming from the South. And that realization of like, holy cow, how did it take this long when we are inundated on a daily basis with the racial injustice in our world and the systematic racism, absolutely 100% in Canada and Quebec as well. There's so much work. Like once I had even just like a little bit more of a glimpse of, from my very limited perspective of what is happening to my neighbors and to people that I love on a daily basis. There's so many resources specifically this summer that were being shared about like books we should be reading, films we should be watching, authors we need to be following, all of this incredible content that has been there for years. I mean, like years, all of the research. And as a white person myself, like I wanted to do something. And, your first instinct, it's classic for white people to go to their Black friends and be like, what can I do? I had no idea. And that is so much not their job. And it is not the job of Black people, Indigenous people, people of color to be treating white people to the work and the emotional work that it takes to educate people on oppression. Like, you can't expect people who are being oppressed to A, get themselves out of being oppressed, and B, teach you about how to get them to be like this work has been done. People, I mean, how many authors have written detailed things of what white people can be doing? We just need to be seeking it out instead of taking what seems to be the easy way and like talking to somebody we know. And I mean, it's a great thing if somebody you know wants to help you, but I didn't want to put that on my friends when this was already such an incredibly devastating summer on top of how many years. But I was also overwhelmed with all of the stuff that I had to read and watch. And I'm not personally somebody who reads that often as a leisurely activity. And so I felt a little overwhelmed with all of that. And I was scared that I would lose motivation. So I decided like, oh, well, what if there was a book club? And so I looked if there was a book club and there wasn't any. And I looked if there was a book club for white people at all, like anywhere that I could maybe base this off of, a book club for white people to educate themselves about systematic racism and specifically to be listening to Black, Indigenous, and people of color's voices, because that's what we need to be doing, is listening and educating ourselves, because the work has been done for us and we just need to listen and take action. So when I couldn't find a book club, I decided to make one. But I also am very aware that I am not the person to be leading a book club on this subject because I know nothing. And the whole point is that I know nothing and I want to learn. And so I reached out to the West Island Black Community Association, WIBCA, and they're incredible. Kemba, the chairperson there, heard my proposal and matched me up with Moshella Short, who's an author in Montreal, and she has helped me. Together, we've created this book club, which we called the Confronting Racism Discussion Group, because it's not only a book club, we also watch films and listen to podcasts, because there's a whole variety of ways that we can be educating ourselves. That is basically what it is. And it's a place for white people to not get together and pat ourselves on the back and say how great of white people we are, but to educate ourselves and listen.
Yeah, and I really love that because it's something you can do as like in your position, right? Like standing by and being complacent, like you're part of the problem, right? You actually have to like take action against it, right? To actually be positive and have a positive influence.
Like you might think all you can do is small, but that's still something. I think educating ourselves is huge. The first book we read is called White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, and it talks a lot about white guilt and a lot about this feeling of like, it's so the worst thing as a white person you can be called as a racist, and like what that does to the conversations around racism. It stops them cold because you can't talk about it. You can't address the fact that you grew up in a racist culture. You can't address the fact that you have racist ideas. You can't address the fact that regardless of if you hate them or not, you can't even acknowledge it, because this feeling of like this hot, like burning word of racist is like the worst thing we can think of. And the reality is, a lot of us who, even feel like we're educated people have racist ideas, support racist policies, aren't listening to people in your community.
Yeah, well, I really like that initiative and I will check it out even more.
Anyone who's interested, just reaching out. We have a Facebook group called Confronting Racism Discussion Group, because it's confronting the racism in yourself first, and then in your community, and then in the world.
Just wrapping up, you're doing the Nothing New Year again this year, and what other things are on the horizon for you? What's next?
I am opening it up, like I had mentioned, to small businesses and local businesses. So I'm excited to be able to be participating again in like supporting our local community, which is so necessary right now during COVID. And hopefully this year launching the book, which is called Added Value, of all of the objects that have added value to my life, but that were also just living in a shelf. And I didn't feel like they were living the best life that they could be living. And so I went on a road trip with the whole box of them and gave them away to people who it would add value to their life. And so I'm doing a book documenting that experience as well.
Very cool. I'll keep an eye out for that too. Yeah, I guess I just want to thank you for coming on, and people can find you. You have your website as well.
Rachael, Seatvet.com. No one else has my name, luckily. So it's pretty easy to find.
Thank you, Rachael, for coming on. It was a great discussion. I've more to talk about, but this is our time now. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun. Great questions.